Good evening, St. Lucian. Welcome to another episode of NewsMaker Live with Laura. If it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live, where we make your stories, our stories. Now, this evening, before we go into the show, I must apologize to all my fans and viewers out there. Last week, I had with me on the show Miss Catherine Sillies from Raise Your Voice, and we had a wonderful chat for about an hour and a half. With regard to some of the mandates of Raise Your Voice. And one of the things that we talked about, or some of the things that we talked about, were women's issues and child rearing issues and child support and what does a woman do when she's getting divorced or getting out of an abusive relationship. That discussion sparked many an interest. And from the time I left the show to this evening, I have been inundated with questions. Sunday at Mass, with fellowship with my co-worshippers, I was just inundated with churchgoers asking questions. And while I might be the first person to read up on things, I'm by no means an expert on human services or gender relation issues. Bringing a product to the market, yes, but speaking from a position of knowledge, resource-wise, whatever I know, it's through speaking with resourceful people or reading up. So I would be the last person to attempt to answer all of your questions. However, I made a promise that I discovered that I was not able to keep, and that was to have a resource person with me this evening to answer all of your questions. First of all, it was quite difficult to get myself steered in the right direction. But once I discovered that, well, as public servants, there is a protocol and bureaucracy and red tape that one must go through in order to have a public servant be with me and to speak about what they do. Whether it's a social worker, whether it is a court official, they needed to get permission from the PS, or their PS, I suppose, or the Public Service Commission. And so I apologize, I was unable, although I had some persons agreeing once they got the requisite permission to, at a later date, join me on the show. I tried to get someone who was retired, but unfortunately, I got stumped there as well. I got one person eventually, but on my way to the studio, that one person had an emergency at home, quite understandably, and could not be with us this evening. So, having said all of that and offering my humblest of apologies and expecting you to forgive me for not being able to keep up with my promise, we're going to have an open mic this evening. And I hope it's going to be a very interactive one. I hope a lot of the people who were asking me questions on the streets, in the stores, at work, at church, will call and ask your questions. What are the things that bother you? What are the issues that affect you? As you know, we are in election mode. We are facing down an impending election. And some of your issues are what our policymakers, current and proposed policymakers, would like to hear. We need to speak out. We need to raise our voice and make our feelings known. Otherwise, they won't know what's happening with us or what our concerns are, what aggrieves us. It's by speaking up, speaking out, that we can let them know, so that they, when coming to us and asking for our votes, to allow them to become the new policymakers or continue as the policymakers of this country, that they will have an idea as to what the people really want. And we're looking at smart things, right? Specific things that we want to see, measurable goals, achievable, realistic, timely goals. That's what we're talking about. So I hope you join me this evening and joining me in conversation about the issues that affect us, that face us. And I promise, and here I am going again, making promises, that in the near future, I will have a resource person to come in to continue where Raise Your Voice left off as it pertains to legal issues with regard to rearing your kids, getting child support, what to expect going through a divorce or getting out of an abusive relationship. Having said all of this, I must say that I'm a little ticked off. I'm a little annoyed. Last evening, I was following a program where Ms. Janine Compton was the guest. And she spoke about a number of things. And I really would love one day to have Ms. Janine Compton sit across from me. First, to have a rap, you know, about her plans. She's a lady that I have a lot of time for. I think she's avant-garde. I think she's bold. I think she's one of those persons, a refreshing breath of air that we would love to see in Parliament, I'm certain. Whether it's as an independent, whether it is as a member of the United Workers' Party or as a member of the St. Lucia Labour Party, regardless, wherever, however she gets there, I'm sure we would like to see her there. She speaks her mind. She's a lady after my own heart. But out of all the things that was said, that she said with her host, the issue that played the biggest importance in our minds, and I say our collectively as St. Lucians, in our collective minds, was whether Jade Brown was qualified for the position that she now holds, and whether the host of the program needed to apologize to her for asking a question. Now, somebody came up to me, and I tell you, I really wish people would learn me by now. You know, I've been doing this for a little while, and a lot of people think they know me, but they don't. A lot of people who should know me don't. And I just want to clear the air. So somebody called me up while I was watching the show. Said, did you hear that this is, are you going to defend Miss Brown? And for a minute I was a little confused. I said, who? She said, Miss Brown, Jade Brown, are you going to defend her as a feminist, as an activist, you know, working towards seeing women get their rightful place and are treated fairly? And I said, listen, if after 1 nanosecond of being in her new position, Miss Jade Brown needs somebody to defend her, knowing that she has a voice and she has the backing of the government and the Prime Minister, then she's in the wrong position and she needs to skedaddle out of here. When you tell me there are a number of issues facing us today, we have had 4 murders for the year. January was a bloody month. The murders were of the most brutal and heinous kind. I'm talking about Joseph Herman. I'm talking about Marcus Nelson. I'm talking about Jean Hamilton Louis. I'm talking about Paul St. Rose of late. These men have all met their demise in a most brutal and heinous manner. That is what I am concerned about, not whether Ms. Brown, you know, is qualified and whether somebody offended her by asking her a question. By the way, congratulations, Jade. I hope you do well in your new position and all of that good stuff. But as I said before, if you, after a nanosecond of attaining this position, need defending, I think you need to run. Run like you've never run and don't look back. Jade Brown was a news reporter. She has a voice. She was an anchor. She has a voice. Now, while I am all for women's rights and the feminist movement and all of that, there are other issues that affect us women, to my mind, that takes more precedence. For instance, out of the 4 murders that we've had this year, 2 of them have female accusers, or, you know, the murder accused are women. I'm talking about the 16-year-old who was today charged for the murder of Paul St. Rose, and I'm talking about Melissa Joseph, who allegedly stabbed and killed Joseph Herman. Why aren't we talking about that? Why am I not being called and asked to speak about that? Why am I not called to ask for people to ask my opinion on those issues? Why are you calling me to talk about something as trivial as a young lady being appointed in a position, a very public position, a position in which many, many, many more questions will be asked of her? And you're going to call me and ask me whether I am going to speak out in defense of her? Are you serious? When you tell me, not only this year, and we've just started the year, we've had 4 murders already, 2 with women implicated. We have just come out of a year where there has been a relentless attack on women in terms of rapes. 2015 showed a relentless, atrocious attack on the daughters of St. Lucia by the sons of St. Lucia. We're not interested in that. We don't care about that. What we care about is somebody being offended because a question was asked of her. Do we remember the 2 students from Sir Arthur Lewis who were brutally and viciously raped in their own homes? Do we remember the 97-year-old great-grandmother who was brutalized in her home? What about the mentally retarded? And forgive my politically incorrect word. I just can't get the right word right now. But you all know what I'm talking about, what I'm referring to when I say a mentally retarded young person who was raped, gang raped at that. Don't we care about that? We don't remember those incidents. Do we even remember them? Are we going to ask of Ms. Brown what her thoughts are? Because I can't recall her using the resources of her station to follow up. And that's the thing, it's not just inherent to Ms. Brown, it's inherent to all of our reporters in this country. We do not follow up on stories. So a heinous crime was committed and we report it, but we do not follow up on it. What about the victims? And I'm not just speaking about the direct victims, I'm talking about the indirect victims as well. The mothers, the fathers of these daughters, the sisters, the aunties, the grandmothers, the friends, the communities from which they hail. What about them? They're victims as well. Do we follow up on these victims, these survivors? Do we care about how they're surviving, how they're pulling through day to day? Do we care? No, we don't care. What we do care about are the trivial things like whether somebody's offended because a question was asked of her. Are you making a connection here? Do you see how appalling it is? Do you see how stupid it is? How we take our time and our energy and focus on trivial matters when there are other issues of greater importance? Do we care that this is an election year, that elections around the corner? Do we care that we are not raising our voices to our current policy makers and those who intend to become policymakers of this country, to let them know what affects us, to let them know what we are looking forward to hearing from them on the market steps or in the boulevard or wherever their stomping grounds are? Do we care that we, the population, the populace, are suffering while these people get a free ride? Do we care about that? Or should it be time that we stop and pause and take note and begin to care? Prior to 2015, there were a number of women brutalized. We're talking about the Valinda Josephs and the Cheryl Hunts and the Mary Ratcliffes, the Valerie Lords, the Giselle Georges, the Crystal Felix, the Crystal St. Thomas, and the Cherise Benoits of this, to use a phrase from Rick Wayne, the sage of rock. I mean, really, do we care? Our women have been brutalized over the years. Our laws need reforming. Meanwhile, our current crop of policymakers have told us that our constitution, there's nothing wrong with it, and that the constitution reform that was proposed was not the will of the people. Do we care that they've just tossed aside our suggestions? Like, we're just pesky children. We don't matter. We don't have an opinion. They're the bosses. They're the shepherds, and we're the sheep, the flock that will follow them mindlessly anywhere. Do we care about that? And speaking about reform, earlier I mentioned to you that the latest homicide, that the person who has been formally charged is a 16-year-old. 16 years old. And it was quite curious for me, because then it got me thinking, 16 years old, my God. While that is the age of consent in this country, it is not the age of the simple majority, which means that this young lady cannot vote in the upcoming elections if she were to be out and able to vote. She would not be able to, because she hasn't attained the age of simple majority. However, she has attained the age of consent. Now, we're also saying that something I found out today, and that just blew my mind, is that to be criminally responsible, you had to be, or rather, you had to be between the ages of, or rather, a 12-year-old could not be found criminally responsible, even if you were to commit a crime or kill somebody. For instance, at age 12, you could not be held criminally responsible. You would be taken, even though that crime was of the most heinous kind, most vicious kind. You could not be held criminally responsible. I think our laws need a little reform here, because I can consent at age 16 to have sex, but I'm not an adult. If I still couldn't get married, and I needed to be 18 years old to be able to vote and to do certain things, to get married and certain things. Why don't we clean that up? Do we care that this manger cochon exists on our law books? Do we care about that? No. What we care about is whether somebody was offended because a question was asked of them. And mind you, these questions are asked of everybody in one way or another. But we still get offended when the questions are asked. Are we not allowed? Don't we have free reign, freedom of speech to ask questions that we feel that need answering? There's no dumb question, or at least we've been told from school days. Now, enough of this. I really just had to get this off my chest, because I just found it was so ridiculous that somebody would actually pay Cable and Wireless or Digicel X amount of dollars to call me and ask me that kind of silly question. You know, and those were some of the things that I said to them. I really don't care. She got a job. It was a promotion. Congratulations to her. Every young person deserves an opportunity to shine and to use their gifts and the talents in one way or another, and to associate with whomever they choose. And if some of us choose to ask questions about that, hey, so be it. Especially when the position in question is a public one. Ain't got no qualms with that. So I just wanted to put that to rest, because a lot of people were asking me, not just that one person, a lot of people were asking me, and I was just kerfuffled as to why we spent so much time as a nation calling into a program and asking those questions, even when you had a potential policymaker, somebody who's interested in representing us in Parliament, sitting right there. We never questioned her on her issues or her mandate or her platform. All we were concerned about was frivolous stuff. And then we wonder why we get the politicians, or we get the policymakers, or we get the government that we do get. I wonder why. Oh, I don't wonder why, but you do. Meanwhile, healthcare in this country has gone to the dogs. Let me just tell you. So a couple of weeks ago, somebody called me and said, can you believe what? It went this way. How would you feel if, by the way, you found that your mother had died at hospital, her body released to a funeral home, and you had not been informed? Well, my reaction was immediate. I said, ridiculous rubbish. Ain't nobody gonna do that. I don't think that there is a health institution in this country which is so mindless as to do something like that. And the person went, well, it actually happened to a family where the mother died, the next of kin was not informed, and the body released to a funeral home. I was aghast, to put it mildly. What? Despite all the horror stories we hear about our health institutions, nah, that couldn't happen. Guess what? It did. So just imagine now, fast forward 2 weeks later, this same next of kin who was not informed of her mother's passing gets a phone call from the same hospital asking to speak to her dead mother. Well, I can just imagine how she must have felt. Are you serious? You have got to be kidding me. Who is this? This is the hospital where her mother was being treated and where her mother had died 2 weeks ago. And I am calling for a certain doctor at the hospital who has just received your mother's file and has noticed something wrong. Your mom has cancer. First of all, there are a number of things wrong here. You don't disclose a patient's health on the phone with just anybody. You didn't ask for the next of kin, you asked for the mother, the person, the patient. The person has not told you that the mother is dead or that the mother is not around or whatever, but you proceed to tell her that XY doctor needs her to come in because she has cancer. How callous. How unfathomable. Just imagine. You're grieving the loss of your mother. You haven't gotten over that. And then you find out that the hospital didn't care, or that the communication system at the hospital is so broken down that they're not even aware that one of their patients has expired. And you're calling the next of kin to inform them that the mother has cancer. Now, what in the heavens were you treating this patient for if you're now discovering that the patient had cancer? What were you treating her for if you're only now finding out after she has been dead for 2 weeks that she has cancer? What were you treating her for? And is that all the bedside manner that a hospital has to inform somebody over the phone? Just by the way, you don't know if the person has a heart condition, you don't know if the person, who the person is, and you're just dropping this bomb like this. Well, you know what? I know this country is in a dire place financially and economically, but if it were me, I would sue the hospital, because it's high time this hospital in particular takes the lives of its patients seriously. It is high time. It is unfathomable, unconscionable how it is that a hospital cannot keep track of its patients. Just imagine you bring your loved one to the hospital and the next time you see them is in the morgue or in the funeral parlor, making it worse with no explanation as to what happened. And to add salt to injury, being called perhaps in the middle of funeral arrangements, if she has not yet been buried, to inform her that, oh, yeah, we found out what's wrong with your mom now. She has cancer. Are you serious, people? Do we care about that? Oh, no, 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 no. What we are concerned about is whether one person is offended because a question was asked of her. We're due for a break. When we come back, your issues, your questions, a wrap session. See you on the other side of the break.